With the new April 2025 ban list, I think that hand traps are going to be better than ever. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over a tier list showing how I feel each of these hand traps fares into the upcoming format. So without any further ado, let's hop straight into it. Starting off with Ashe, this one is probably still a main deck staple. Obviously good against every single deck in the format, and with the Mulcharmy still running around, I think Ashe is important to have in every single deck that has the potential to get hit with a Mulcharmy. So not much to really say about this card. This card should probably be the first hand trap that you put into every single deck. Next up is Cherries. I think Cherries is interesting. Although yes, a card like Detonator went to 1, I don't think it really changes how Cherries stands in the format overall. I think it's kind of like a niche tech option. You could choose to play it if you're playing something like Metaltronus and already playing the targets anyways, but I feel like if this card wasn't really seeing play in the prior format, even when Detonator was at more than 1, I don't really think it'll see too much play in this current format. I do think it's a cool card and it does have some potential, but I don't think it's something that's going to be seeing widespread play. Next up is Contact C. Contact C is still not very good. There isn't any reason to really play this. All the top decks don't really lose to this card, except maybe you could say like Pure Ryziel, but I think Pure Ryziel is going to be a lot less popular now that they've lost a few of the Ryziel monsters. The deck just becomes a little less consistent overall, so I think people are going to be switching to the Fiendsmith variant if they still choose to play Ryziel. And the Fiendsmith variant can just simply link off the Contact C to go into Moon and then go from there. Next up is Dogwood. I never liked this card, and I think that this card is only worth siding if your deck has a very big problem with time, but I think most confident decks generally shouldn't have that issue. Next up is Droll. I think Droll is going to be a main deck staple this upcoming format. With all the hits to Ryziel, we can expect more people to be playing consistency cards like 7 Tachyon, and that makes the deck lose a lot harder to Droll and Lockbird. It'll cap their ceiling off, prevent them from getting access to Duo Drive. And even with the Malice deck, I think a lot of people are going to be trying to shove in like supplementary engines, either like Bystials Lubellion or Sky Striker Engage once again. Not to mention, if you're playing a combo deck that loses to a Mulcharmy, you always have the potential to just Droll yourself on your turn after getting Mulcharmy to stop your opponent from drawing more. Not every deck's going to be able to take advantage of that, but I think that this, combined with the fact that Droll should be good against both Ryziel and Malice now, makes it a main deck staple in my opinion. Next up for the Mulcharmies, I think Fulos is probably a main deck staple. It does a lot of work against Ryziel, Malice, but all the other rogue decks out there, there are only a few decks in the metagame that don't really lose to this, so I think that putting it in your main deck is a pretty safe bet. Meowth, I think, is definitely something you should be considering in your side deck. Meowth, of course, is very good against Malice. Doesn't really do too much to Ryziel, but it can be good against some other decks like Crystron as well. I think there are enough decks that Meowth is good into this current format, so it is something worth siding. Although I do feel like unless you want specifically targeted hate towards Malice, I'd probably choose some other hand traps like Purulia in the side deck before, because Purulia does hit a wider range of decks in the format. It's good against decks like Ryziel, can be usable against Malice, and it's good against pretty much all the rogue decks out there too. So in terms of the Charmies, probably main deck Fulos, and I would probably side deck Purulia, and then if you so choose, you can side deck Meowth as well. Next up is Imperm. This one is also pretty definitively a main deck staple. Imperm's still great. It has the benefit of playing around Triple Tactics Talents. Yes, even though that card's still at 1, it's still important to have access to something like that. So I think Imperm's flexibility as a hand trap and potential board breaker going second just makes it so you definitely need to put this in your main deck if you're choosing to play hand traps. Next up, Phantasme. I think Phantasme has some side deck potential still this format. The Fiendsmith engine is still going to be very popular. It's going to be played by a lot of decks. And if your deck can benefit from the free body that Phantasme gives you and could benefit from digging a few cards deeper into your deck for like extra hand traps, it could be nice. I don't think this is something that you definitely have to side, but I think there are probably a few decks that would like to take advantage of the Phantasme in their side deck, giving them that extra body as well. So if your deck plays like the Fiendsmith engine, for example. Next up is Retaliating C. I think Retaliating C is just not very good this current format. There aren't any decks that really lose to this in the metagame. Same with Meister. This card just doesn't really do enough. Not many graveyard effects you want to be hitting. Warner, I think, is interesting. I think this and Valor are things you could consider main decking. These monster type hand traps got a little bit better now that talents is down to 1, your opponent's going to be able to punish these a lot less often. So if you do want to play extra copies of effect negation in your hand trap lineup in addition to impermanence, I think that Mourner and Veiler are very solid choices. It's still important to stop cards like Yugioh Duo Drive, the Malice normal summons. These cards are just very flexible and good into pretty much every single deck out there. So if you want like generic hand traps that are almost always going to be live, then I think Veiler, Imperm, Mourner are pretty solid options. Next up is Chaos Hunter. I think Chaos Hunter is something with side deck potential. I think Lancia, of course, is just straight up better, but if you so choose, you can play Chaos Hunter if you want some extra Malice hate. I do want to caveat though, Chaos Hunter is pretty bad into the Fiendsmith engine, and a lot of the Malice players are probably going to be pivoting towards the Fiendsmith engine and away from more of a pure build since they did lose some consistency. So I think Chaos Hunter gets a little bit worse, but outside of that, it's still a pretty solid side card. Next up is Nibiru. I think that Nibiru is probably at the top of main deck potential. I don't want to put it in staple just yet because a deck like Bystials is still going to be able to have good ways to play around Nibiru, and even though Malice lost Link Decoder, the deck still has abilities to play around Nibiru, and they can even do so with their regular one card combos still. Like, I think obviously Nibiru is a very good card and can heavily punish players that either overextend or don't really know what they're doing with the deck, but I think a very competent and experienced player with both Bystials and Malice will be able to play around this card even despite all the hits. So I think that Nibiru is something you can consider putting into your main deck. It's not always going to be live either. There are some decks in the format where it's not going to be super great against. It's not particularly great against most Fiendsmith based decks because they set up follow-up despite getting Nibiru'd, and they always have a way to threaten Nibiru on like their 5th summon. So I think that overall Nibiru is probably something you want to consider putting into your main deck, and it's definitely good enough, although I wouldn't put it in every single deck. Next up is Shifter, and I think Shifter is something you want to only consider now. I don't think it's like a definitive main deck staple if your deck can play it. Obviously, it's at 1. It's going to be very inconsistent. You're not going to see it that often. You do run the risk of seeing it past turn 1, and that's really bad because it's going to be dead a lot of the times. That being said, though, Shifter is still very powerful against pretty much every single deck in the format aside from Malice, and if your deck has the ability to play it and you want a huge blowout card, I think it's still worth considering putting into your main deck, but obviously not every deck's going to be able to play it, so that's why it just goes in main deck potential. I guess on that note, the 2 Dominuses also fall in the same boat. I would say that Purge is probably a little bit better than Impulse because Impulse isn't as impactful against a deck like Bystials, whereas Purge will generally almost always be good and live against decks like Bystials and Malice. So if your deck can play these, I would definitely consider maining them. They're very powerful hand traps like impermanence that don't trigger talents, but not every single deck can play them, and as such, well, like Shifter, probably will just have to go in main deck potential. Next up is Lancia. This is definitely a side deck staple. It's still great into Malice, even though they will be swapping to Fiendsmith and potentially Bystials. I think Lancia is still worth putting in against them. It's maybe a little bit worse against the Fiendsmith builds because they do have a plan B, but I think it's still good enough. And then next up for the 3 Psy-frames, I mean, I don't really know what to say about these. Like Gamma, Delta, probably side deck potential. Epsilon, no. Your opponent shouldn't be shotgunning any traps when you have no monsters on the field. And then as with Gamma and Delta, obviously they're super high impact hand traps, but I think that you generally want some other hand traps that are a little bit more live, don't require you to play a brick like driver, and are maybe a little bit more consistent. So I think that these are still okay, but if they aren't seeing play like last format, I don't think that really changes in our current format either. Next up is Ogre. I think Ogre is interesting. It's generally a card I think that doesn't really do much to a deck like Malice, because a lot of their normal plays don't really lose to Ghost Ogre, and I don't think that really changes even post Banlist. I think one interesting note about Ogre against Malice now though is that some players may be pivoting more to focus on like the OG Firewall Dragon, and OG Firewall Dragon isn't going to be able to resolve its bounce as far as I know, if you just simply Ogre it, and I think that could be important for taking a interruption off their end board. But outside of that, I don't think the interaction between Ogre and Malice really changes for the most part. It's mainly just going to be good against a deck like Blue Eyes hitting True Light. It's going to be good against against Yugioh hitting a card like Duo Drive. So I think that this is okay, something that has the potential to be side deck, but I think that there are some more consistent cards like the Effect Negators that you want to play in your deck before choosing to put Ogre in there. Next up is Vados. I don't think this card is very good this format. Field spells aren't super crazy important right now. And yes, even though Bystials and Mouse do both have field spells, I don't think hitting them is going to be the end of the world for those decks. Next up is Ghost Bell. I think Ghost Bell, like Ogre, has some niche applications in the format. Obviously pretty good against Malice. You're able to stop like GWC from resolving, and that can cut off their white binder and essentially all of their grave interruptions, and that can be really nice. Bell though isn't really too good against any other deck in the format, so I think unless you want a hand trap that's specifically very good against Malice, you would play Bell. But other than that, I don't think Bell just does enough against any of these other decks in the format overall, so I wouldn't really be choosing to play this unless you wanted more Malice hate. Next up is DD Crow. I don't think DD Crow is very good this format either. I think it's just the worst Bystial overall. There isn't really any key graveyard cards that you want to hit that can't be hit by Bystials, I think, for the most part, unless very specifically you can't play Bystials in your deck for some reason and need some graveyard interruption. I think that you would just always choose to play Bystials over it. And speaking of Bystials, I would say Bystials are probably still main deck potential. I think a lot of decks are still going to be on the Fiendsmith engine, especially since it wasn't hit. And of course, the Bystials are very good into the Fiendsmith engine and has some applications against Yugioh as well. You can hit like the Eclipse Twins out of the graveyard. You can hit the Eclipse Twin targets out of the grave. That can be pretty solid. And his Malice probably a little bit worse, but I think that the Bystials are still strong enough to be considered to be played in your main deck. They're still powerful extenders that give you free bodies and disrupt your opponent's graveyard. And like I said, with the Fiendsmith engine running around, definitely something to still consider. So that's going to do it for this tier list. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. Let me know if you agree, disagree. Do you think hand traps are going to get better this format now that Talent Start is at 1? Or do you think things are kind of going to stay the same as they were in the previous format? Let me know in the comments below. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the video, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.